All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an idea from Michael Parenti's Blackshirts and Reds that's going to flip a big political assumption right on its head. So, when I say communism's fiercest critic, who comes to mind? Probably someone from the political right, right? Well, according to Michael Parenti, the most effective critics, they came from a much more surprising place. Okay, let's really get into this. Yeah, he argues that for more than 100 years, the most damaging critiques of communism didn't come from its usual enemies. Nope. They came from inside the left itself. So today, we're going to unpack his whole theory of what he calls left anti-communism. So, okay, what is left anti-communism anyway? What does Parenti actually mean by that? It's not just about, disagreeing. He's talking about a really deep-seated mindset, one that he says had some huge consequences. Yeah, he basically says it's not a real political analysis. He calls it a non-falsifiable orthodoxy. That's a fancy way of saying it's a belief system that's so rigid you can't even challenge it with facts. It's like any information about communist countries gets automatically run through this hostile filter, and everything gets twisted to fit a negative story. And check this out. This quote from the activist, Angela Davis, really brings it home. It's such a powerful personal take. She's looking back and realizing how even though she was a committed Marxist, she herself was influenced by this anti-communist vibe that was just everywhere in the European left. Okay, so why? Why does Parenti think this happens? He argues it all comes down to pressure, this intense pressure to prove you're credible, that you're pure, especially when you're trying to be heard in the mainstream. And this gets to the heart of what he calls the credibility trap. The idea is that a lot of folks on the left feel like they have to do this performance. He calls it an anti-communist genuflection. Basically, you have to publicly bash the Soviet Union or other communist states just so people will take you seriously on any other issue. It's like a signal that you're one of the safe leftists. But here's the kicker. Parenti says that by doing this, they actually end up making the very anti-communist establishment they're supposed to be against even stronger. And this isn't a new thing. This quote from George Orwell, wow, it really shows how deep this mindset goes. I mean, think about it. This is right in the middle of World War II. The Soviet Union is taking the absolute brunt of the Nazi war machine, and yet Orwell is saying that the real test of your honesty is your willingness to criticize them. For Parenti, that just perfectly captures how deep this purity test thing really is. So this mindset, which you can see goes way back, it wasn't just some debate club topic. No, according to Parenti's analysis, this had serious real-world fallout, and not just for communists, but for the entire progressive movement. Parenti literally draws a straight line from these internal arguments on the left all the way to global conflict. He says that when leftists started red-baiting each other, throwing around the communist label to shut people down, they were actually helping to create this super hostile political climate. And that climate, he argues, is exactly what gave U.S. leaders a total green light to go and wage wars, hot and cold, without much of a fight back home. And really, here's the bottom line for Parenti. He says that if you look at it from the perspective of the people in power, it makes zero difference whether you're a communist subversive or a loyal American liberal. If your ideas seriously threaten their economic power, you're the enemy, plain and simple, and you're going to be treated like it. Which brings us to this huge tension that Parenti points out. He thinks that left anti-communists are often judging these real-world revolutions against some kind of impossible, perfect standard. They're not taking into account the absolutely brutal conditions these movements were actually facing. So he frames this as a clash between two completely different things. You've got pure socialism on one side, this perfect, flawless idea that only exists on paper. And then on the other side, you've got what he calls siege socialism. That's his term for what actually happened, trying to build something totally new while you're being constantly attacked, militarily, economically, you name it, by the most powerful countries in the world. And his whole point is that the critics are yelling about the messy, ugly reality of the siege, but they're completely ignoring the fact that there was a siege in the first place. And this quote just nails that argument, right? It's saying, hey, maybe blaming individual leaders for their screw-ups is just too easy. Maybe by focusing on that, we're missing the giant whirlwind, all those massive external pressures that were really shaping their decisions and, their ultimate fate. So, where does this all lead? What's Parenti's conclusion, especially looking back after 1989 and the fall of the Soviet Union? Well, his takeaway is pretty stark. He basically says that a lot of people on the left celebrated the fall of communism, but they had no idea what was about to be lost. His take is that the Soviet Union, with all of its problems, and he acknowledges them, still acted as a critical check on American power. It was a counterbalance, and it provided real support to liberation movements all over the world. When it collapsed, he says, we didn't get a more peaceful world. We got imperialism completely off the leash. So in the end, Parenti's whole analysis kind of leaves us with this really tough question. And it's one that you could apply to pretty much any political movement. At what point does that hunt for ideological purity, that need for mainstream approval, at what point does it stop being a good thing and start becoming a self-inflicted wound? It's something to really think about when you look back at the messy, complicated way history actually plays out. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.